So, have you ever had an experience where you had high expectations? Something was on the horizon and you were excited about it, worked up about it, hopeful about it, to the point where you just couldn't wait for this thing to come into your life. When I was 10 years old, I asked my parents for a bicycle. But I asked them for a very specific kind of bicycle, not just any bicycle. I wanted a BMX motocross bicycle with a 20-inch frame, with straight handlebars, motocross bike. It was all I could think about. Didn't have one. It was awful. Christmas Day was coming, getting closer and closer, and I could picture myself coming out of the driveway with that bike. I could picture myself pulling up in the schoolyard and everybody just clearing out of the way because I had arrived with my bike. You can see a picture of what I was picturing. Well, Christmas morning came and I raced out into the living room and there was a bike. My parents were on the other side of the living room, beaming with pride. I was shattered. Somehow we had had a conversation where no one understood what the other was expecting. Kids in my neighborhood got beaten up riding bicycles like that. I believe that there was all kinds of energy and emotion in the conversation between James and John and Jesus. A sense of real excitement. You know, James and John were often called the sons of thunder. They did not lack for emotion. And here they were in front of their rabbi, their teacher, Jesus. And just the way they asked the question says some things about the relationship they had and what they believed and didn't believe about Jesus. Their question for Jesus, people have often talked about it as evidence of their selfishness or that they were self-seeking. I don't doubt that there may have been that part of human nature that creeped in there, but I think there's a much deeper conversation going on between James and John and Jesus. And that's why Mark takes the time to include this story in his gospel. So before we dive into the deeper reason of why this conversation happens, let's have a prayer together. As ever, God, when one of your servants stands to speak, speak the loudest and the clearest to that servant. Amen. You can see in the way that these two disciples asked Jesus the question that they have the right hope. There's nothing wrong with the relationship between them and Jesus. It's important for us to understand that they are loyal, they are hopeful, and all of that comes from the relationship they have with Jesus. They're committed to following him. He's the one who leads them, and he's the one they love. And so now comes the request. Let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory. Their request signals a belief that they have in Jesus that glory is what's ahead for him. That everything that he said about himself is true, that he will be glorified. They've missed a whole bunch of other things. But maybe it's because they love him so much. Before any of us form too many opinions, assign too many motives to James and John, we might want to think about our own relationships and how we interact and talk to people that we love to spend time with, that we're going to be separated from. How many of us have had this kind of conversation? Hey, if you get there before me, do what? Save a seat next to you, because I want to sit with you. Hey, if you're making reservations, if you're buying the tickets, make sure that you get my ticket right next to yours, because it's going to be so much better if we're there together. What James and John struggle with isn't the right hope, it's the wrong perspective. They misunderstand what Jesus has asked of them because they find their hope in him. It's the same thing that I often struggle with. My humanity gets in the way of my desire to follow Jesus. It's not an issue of belief for me anymore. There's just that little part of human nature that creeps in where I'd like just a little bit of Jesus' glory to shine over on me. I want to be noticed a little. I want to be recognized a little. I want to be mentioned a little. I want to be significant. And I lose track of the fact that that's not the kind of significant that Jesus cares about at all. It's the wrong perspective on significance if I look at it from my perspective. What's interesting is that by the time you get to the 10th chapter of Mark's gospel, 3 times he's already made it clear to his disciples that he is going to experience heavenly glory. But he also has explained to them why his heavenly glory will come through a path of suffering and death, and why that's absolutely necessary. Somehow they've missed it. Somehow they have allowed themselves to ignore it. Somehow they've stepped away from it. Listen to how Jesus describes what's ahead for him. Mark chapter 10, verses 33 and 34. For him to be condemned to death and handed over to be mocked and flogged and finally crucified. Not a lot of room for error there. And yet somehow they simply couldn't or wouldn't hear that Jesus' road to glory by necessity had to go through Calvary. It had to go to the cross before it could go to glory. And so Jesus asked them, verses 38 and 39, are you able to drink the cup that I drink? Or to be baptized with the baptism that I would be baptized with? And what's interesting is, to me, how quickly they answer tells me that they've missed it again. As soon as he asks the question, they say, we can. Bob, actually, when he read the scripture, read it that way, that we can. They answer right away. They don't understand the depth of what Jesus has already said yes to, that in order to be his followers, they have to say yes to as well. Jesus, we can drink from that cup. We can be part of that baptism. Listen again to verses 40 to 45. Because this is Jesus talking about the path that he will walk, that they must walk as well. He says, to sit at my right or my left, it's not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they've been prepared. And when the 10 heard this, they became indignant with James and John. In other words, they thought it was totally self-seeking that they would even ask these questions. And Jesus calls them all together. You know, those who are regarded as rulers in the Gentile community, they lord it over them. They're high officials. They exercise authority over them. It will not be so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you, you will be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave to all. For even the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus tells them, if you want to be close to me, it's not about glory. It's not about my right or my left. If you want to be close to me, then you have to come where I will be. And by the way, I'm not really a head of the table kind of master. You're not going to spend a whole bunch of time in the VIP section if I'm the one you're following. That may be what you're familiar with. That may be what you've seen in the Gentile community. That may be how other people model leadership, but that will never be my way. My way is the servant's way. My way is the way that my Father has called me to go. My way is the way of the servant. I'm not here walking this earth to see what I can get. I've come here to show you what I'm willing to give. And what I will give is my life. And it will be a ransom for many. You see, church, James and John are asking for places at a table, places in a room that Jesus won't even be sitting at. He actually tells them in verse 40 to sit at my right, my left, not for me to grant. Those places belong to those for whom they've been prepared. In other words, I'm not in charge of the seating arrangement here. What I'm in charge of is the serving. And that's where we'll find our significance. When we follow Jesus, our significance is found in following a servant leader. Throughout this whole message series, Pastor Patina and I have been talking about how we live out our life of faith by maturing in the significance that finds its source only in God. That's the source of what it means to live a significant life. And each of us will have to decide our own how we do that and what that means for us. I can't do that for you. You can't do that for me. But we offer a whole bunch of things here at First Church. And the reason we offer so many mission opportunities and fellowship opportunities and learning opportunities isn't so that you can be a part of all of them. It's so that you might find a way into servant leadership through some of them. That people will see the face of Jesus and get to know Jesus more clearly through the things that are happening all around us. Here at First Church, I think it looks a lot like simple servanthood, collecting food for at-risk seniors. Pastor Patina talked about it in our concerns and joys before the prayer. Many seniors who will perhaps never meet, who may never come to our church, and yet somehow a bag of food dropped off at their house has the opportunity to be for them a clearer picture of Jesus than perhaps they would see otherwise. Maybe it looks like a whole family that has some food to eat when the kids get home from their day at school or from their week at Lawton Elementary. Again, people you may never meet, but maybe that's the table that Jesus is most interested in sitting at. Maybe it's being a part of a flow group or a Sunday school class, some other gathering where we gather and we regularly support each other through accountable fellowship, through learning, through outreach, through our times of worship. We serve with one another, and at the same time, we serve one another. We are the body of Christ. Jesus said, I came not to see what you can do for me, but I came to see what we might do for the world together. The love of my Father lived out through my suffering, sacrifice, and through your servant heart. Perhaps we could change the world together. So what does this kind of life look like for those of us who claim to be followers of Jesus? What does that day-to-day life look like if you say that you're following in the footsteps of Jesus? Well, whatever you think it is, whatever I think it is, whatever the Church of Jesus Christ thinks it is today, I'm just going to tell you, folks, we better get on with it. Because the world around us is moving on. And they're moving further away from the image of Jesus Christ, which they so desperately need to see. Maybe you're at a place in your life where you're not going to collect food anymore. You're not going to help rake yards. You're not going help unload pumpkins, but maybe your ministry at this time in your life is a ministry of prayer. Maybe you're praying for all those things and for all those people who are making those things happen. Maybe you're writing notes to folks who are no longer able to come to church, or maybe you're writing notes to first-time visitors who are just discovering that church could be something that could bless their life. It's something different for you than perhaps it is for somebody else. And maybe it's not what you do. Maybe it's the simple things that you don't do. Maybe it's deciding that you don't have to have the snarkiest meme about the latest statistics on COVID because you're the only one that's really following the science. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Was he just being poetic on the side of that hill? Or did he really think that that was how our lives were supposed to be lived, not only for today, but forever? Soren Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher in the 1800s. And he drew an interesting distinction between people who claimed to have a relationship with Jesus Christ and people who truly attempted to live like Jesus. Kierkegaard said, following Jesus is about lifting him up higher and higher, not ourselves. But here's the amazing thing that we discover. When we follow Jesus, when we seek to follow him moment by moment, day by day, when we seek to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, we can follow him all the way to God's kingdom. If we want to be with him, if we want kingdom, we can find it. And at the same time, we can have a global significance. That's what I want to close with. You know, it's interesting, in our Western culture, we're constantly hearing that whatever institution or organization is seeking to measure itself, it can only measure itself by its growth. If you're getting bigger, you're getting better. And what's interesting is the church has adopted much the same model. Oftentimes, our methods are entrepreneurial. The techniques that we use are marketplace techniques. I read an article by a church researcher named Scott Thuma. And in the article in Forbes magazine, he's quoted as saying, "Growth equals success. And religious growth not only equals success, but it also reveals God's blessing on ministry." Church, that's wrong. That's not accurate. Everything we do here that God is blessing isn't growing in numbers, because it's not always about the numbers. We don't exist to grow in size. We exist to grow in relationships. And the closer our relationship with Jesus Christ and the closer the relationships we have with one another, the healthier we will be. There may be growth in there somewhere, but growth isn't what we're about. We exist to grow in relationship, to grow in influence. We're here to represent the healing power of Jesus Christ in the world today. You know, one of the questions that I hope First Church leaders are asking on a regular basis is not how big is our church now, but how well are we loving? How active are we in our serving? How much are we sacrificing so that others might see and encounter Jesus Christ as a living being in their life? A personal encounter that they cannot deny and that they can never forget. You know, it's interesting, and Pastor Patina has, in the time that she's been here, helped us to raise up a mission guide team and to have partnerships in mission ministries, just all different kinds of ministries. We have partnerships with the Florida United Methodist Children's Home, with the Orlando Union Rescue Mission, with Harbor Hope, who helps us in our ministry to deal with human trafficking. All of that is about servant leadership. It's about partnership. Whether it's time or talent or treasure, it's about being with Jesus, not in glory, but in serving. In the time that I've been here, I've watched this church wrap its hands and its hearts around ministries in places like Bithlo and Haiti and Kentucky and Costa Rica and Puerto Rico and Uganda and Louisiana, and everywhere that you show up with your heart and your hands, we discover that Jesus is already there. That the servant heart of Jesus longs to be where people need him. I want to close by offering you a challenge this week. We've got 6 days till the next time we gather for worship, unless you come to Saturday night and you have 5 days. But you have 6 days before the next time we gather for this service. I want to challenge you to go find Jesus everywhere you can. But I also want to challenge you not just to look around here. I know you'll see Jesus around here. But you'll find Jesus in lots of places. You'll find him where the hungry are fed. You'll find him where the homeless find shelter, where the sick find comfort, the brokenhearted find compassion, where safety, when people are at risk, we can assure them of that. Those that are trafficked will find deliverance, and those who are struggling can find acceptance. It can happen wherever the one who came not to be served, but to serve, who came to give his life as a ransom for many. You show up to serve with him, and you'll be doing some significant serving. So let's go out and find him this week. You've got 6 days to complete this assignment, and that's the truth.